New York shimmered behind the glass as if the entire skyline were watching the deal unfold. Elliot Reed adjusted his tie, feeling the familiar tightness around his throat, a mix of ambition and anxiety. The boardroom on the 47th floor overlooked Midtown. Yellow cabs like ants, steam rising from the grates, LED billboards shouting silently into the afternoon haze. Inside, the only sound was the soft scrape of a pen across paper as Elliot signed the final page of the $800 million contract. He had chased deals his entire life, but nothing on this scale. $800 million meant more than numbers. It meant reputation, leverage, and a new seat at tables he had never imagined. Across from him sat a man in a dark, impeccably cut suit, silver hair combed back, expression almost relaxed. They had introduced him simply as Mr. DeLuca, principal investor. Elliot had looked up his companies, his shell corporations, his holdings. Everything looked legal enough. Perhaps too clean, he had thought, but dismissed the doubt as paranoia. When the last signature was done, a young assistant slipped out and returned with several bottles of deep red wine and crystal glasses that looked far too expensive for an office. Someone dimmed the light slightly. The atmosphere shifted from formal to celebratory in seconds. Phones appeared to capture the moment, executives exchanged handshakes, and Elliot's inbox began to vibrate with congratulations from people who barely knew him. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the partners announced, raising a glass, "to the deal of the year, and to Elliot, who made this possible." There was applause, whistles, the clink of glass. Elliot smiled, feeling the tension finally begin to leak out of his shoulders. As he reached for his glass, one of the older men, broad-shouldered with a heavy watch, stopped him with a gentle hand. "Not yet," the man said. "Stand up for a second." Confused but compliant, Elliot rose from his chair. The room fell into a hush, that soft collective silence that carries both respect and expectation. Mr. DeLuca stood as well, his gaze never leaving Elliot. "In our circle," DeLuca said, voice smooth, "we have a way to welcome someone who proves himself." Before Elliot could ask what that meant, 2 bottles were uncorked at once, with sharp pops. Instead of filling glasses, the men holding them stepped toward him. In one surreal second, cold wine was cascading over his shoulders, soaking his suit jacket, his shirt, dripping down his tie. The shock froze his breath. The room exploded in cheers and laughter. He stood there, stunned, feeling the liquid run down his neck. Phones were up again, capturing every angle as if this moment had been planned for weeks. Elliot forced a smile, wiping his eyes, trying to laugh like everyone else. "Welcome to the family," DeLuca said, stepping forward and placing a hand on Elliot's shoulder, fingers firm. "You've earned this, family." The word clung to him more than the wine did. In high finance, people used it loosely, calling teams a family for marketing effect. Yet something in DeLuca's tone was different. There was no joke there, no levity. It sounded closer to a promise or a warning. An assistant rushed over with towels, apologizing even though the act had clearly been deliberate. Elliot dabbed at his face, feeling the sticky sweetness on his skin. The city lights beyond the glass seemed slightly distorted now, like he was seeing them through tinted water. "You'll never forget this day," another partner said, clapping him on the back. That at least felt true. Hours later, Elliot walked alone along a busy Midtown sidewalk. The night air cool against the faint smell of wine still lingering on his clothes. He had changed jackets in the company's guest suite, but a faint stain remained at the cuff, like a quiet reminder. Honking horns, distant sirens, the murmur of conversations in different languages. New York at night was a constant low roar. His phone buzzed, a message from his closest colleague, Priya. "Congrats. Big league now, but that family comment sounded weird on the live stream. Call me." He stopped walking. Live stream. He hadn't realized someone had pushed the celebration out publicly. He opened the link she sent and watched himself on video, standing, smiling awkwardly as wine was poured over him. DeLuca's hand on his shoulder, the phrase, "Welcome to the family," echoing in crystal-clear audio. Millions of dollars, a viral clip, a word that wouldn't leave his head, family. He pocketed the phone and kept walking. The deal was done. A rational mind would celebrate, sleep, and show up fresh the next morning. But as he passed a narrow side street, a black sedan idling at the curb caught his eye. Inside, in the back seat, someone was watching him. When their eyes met, the sedan's window slid up slowly, and the car pulled away without haste. For the first time that day, Elliot felt something stronger than excitement. He felt unease settling in, steady and cold. The next morning, Elliot's office window framed a washed-out Manhattan sky. The city seemed less glamorous in daylight, its imperfections more visible: scaffolding, cracked sidewalks, trash bags piled high on the curb. He had always admired that contrast, the way New York combined power and decay. Today, it felt like a metaphor pointed directly at him. Emails clogged his inbox, interview requests, partnership proposals, invitations to events he had never considered attending. There were also messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly remembering their great connection, he skimmed through them, responding politely, his mind only half present. A knock sounded on his open door. Priya leaned against the frame, blazer over jeans, coffee in hand, eyes sharper than any due diligence report. "You look like you slept about 20 minutes, she said. 30, he replied. "Being famous is exhausting." She stepped in and closed the door behind her, lowering her voice. "I watched that video, twice. It's intense. Who are these people really, Elliot?" "They're capital," he said, almost by reflex. "They're our way into deals we could never touch alone." She sat down across from him. "I looked into DeLuca last night. Public records, old articles, some things buried deeper. His name pops up in stories about hospitality, shipping, logistics, but always indirectly, always in the background. When there are problems, labor disputes, allegations of intimidation, he's never on the official paperwork. It's always someone else." "That's not unusual," Elliot replied, but the defense sounded hollow even to him. Priya studied his face. "And that car following you after the party? You mentioned it in your text." "Could have been anyone. It's New York." She didn't smile. "Or it could be that you just signed $800 million worth of leverage with a man who might have more history than he shows. And last night he called you family in a room where no one laughed, like it was a joke." Silence settled between them. Elliot stared at a framed photo on his desk. His parents in their small Midwest backyard, proud of the son who had made it to Wall Street. They had no idea what that world really looked like. "I did my homework," he said. "All the compliance checks, all the paperwork, everything's clean." Priya nodded slowly. "On paper, sure. But you and I both know there's a whole economy that lives between the lines on that paper." He exhaled, feeling the weight of her words pressing against his chest. "What are you saying?" "Walk away. We're past that point. I'm saying be careful. Watch who calls, who invites you, who suddenly wants to be close. And if anything feels off, you talk to me before you talk to them." There was an earnestness in her voice that reminded him why he trusted her more than anyone in this glass tower. She wasn't impressed by numbers alone. She cared about what sat behind them. The day blurred into meetings, calls, and careful smiles. By late afternoon, Elliot was on his way to a celebration dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in Lower Manhattan, the kind of place where the lights were low and every table felt like a private negotiation. The car service wound through traffic, past construction sites and street vendors, until finally stopping in front of a discreet black door with no sign, only a small brass bell. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the rich smell of garlic, tomatoes, and something more subtle, an undercurrent of cigar smoke, faint but persistent. A host greeted him by name without asking, leading him through a maze of tables toward a secluded back room. DeLuca was already there, seated at the head of a long table, talking quietly with two men whose faces Elliot recognized from the signing party. They stopped speaking when he entered. "Elliot," DeLuca said, standing to shake his hand. "Come, sit. Tonight we eat. We talk like men, not like emails." The others chuckled. Elliot took a seat to DeLuca's right. The walls were lined with photographs, old black and white shots of men in suits standing outside delis, newspaper clippings about local politicians, faded pictures of family gatherings. The past was on full display, but carefully curated. Food began to arrive almost immediately. Antipasti, fresh bread, wine that looked as expensive as it tasted. DeLuca poured for everyone, his movements unhurried. "To new partnerships," he said, raising his glass. They drank. Conversation drifted from markets to politics to stories about the old neighborhood. Elliot listened, noting the way they referred to downtown blocks by nicknames, the way they spoke about certain people with a mix of respect and caution. At one point, as the main course arrived, DeLuca leaned closer to Elliot. "You did well yesterday," he said. "Most men, you pour wine on their head. They get angry, embarrassed. You smiled. You understood that sometimes, to be part of something bigger, you have to let go of how you look for a minute." "I understood it was your room," Elliot replied carefully. "And I was your guest." DeLuca nodded, satisfied. "You're smart. That's why you're here. But I want you to understand something else. In this city, there are deals you can't do without certain people opening certain doors. We're those people. We make things smoother, less complicated. You follow?" Elliot chose his words with care. "You have access I don't. That's why this partnership makes sense." "That's part of it," DeLuca said. "The other part is loyalty. I don't like surprises, Elliot. If someone comes to you offering a shortcut, a back door, you tell me. Not because I'm your boss, but because I'm your family now. And family looks out for family." There it was again. Family. This time, in the room where no one reached for a phone, no one laughed. One of the men across the table watched Elliot closely, as if measuring his reaction. "I don't do shortcuts," Elliot said. "Everything I've built, I built the hard way." DeLuca smiled slightly. "Good. Then you'll appreciate what we've built, too." The rest of the dinner passed in stories and subtle questions. Elliot found himself revealing small pieces of his past, his modest upbringing, the scholarships, the nights working late to prove himself. In return, DeLuca shared almost nothing concrete about his own history, only fragments wrapped in nostalgia. When Elliot finally stepped back out onto the street, the night had deepened. The restaurant door closed behind him with a soft, final click. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. As he approached, the rear window slid down a few inches. The man from across the table, the one who had studied him so intently, looked out. "One thing you should know," the man said quietly. "No one pours wine like that on someone they don't expect to keep around." The window went back up. The SUV pulled away. Elliot remained on the sidewalk for a long moment, listening to the city breathe around him. Somewhere between the skyscrapers and the side streets, between the boardrooms and back rooms, a line had been crossed. He just didn't know yet how far. The following weeks changed tempo in Elliot's life. The deal began to move from announcement to execution, and reality replaced headlines. Lawyers coordinated closings, banks shuffled funds, regulators reviewed filings. On the surface, everything was exactly as it should be. Yet beneath that surface, new patterns appeared. First, invitations increased, private dinners, exclusive charity events, and small gatherings. in penthouse apartments overlooking the Hudson. The guest lists were always a blend. A few familiar faces from finance, several city officials, and men who looked like they were more comfortable on streets than spreadsheets. Elliot noticed the subtle choreography: who spoke first, who remained silent, who ordered, who waited. Second, favors appeared out of nowhere. A permit approval that had been stuck for months suddenly moved forward. A tough zoning issue for one of Elliot's other projects resolved itself after a casual mention over dessert. A supplier notorious for delays became strangely punctual. Each time something smoothed out, someone from DeLuca's circle called, not to brag, but to check in. The message was unspoken but clear: this is what family does. Priya saw the pattern faster than he wanted to admit. "You realize these coincidences are not coincidences," she said one evening in his office, the city turning orange outside the window. "I'm not asking for anything off the books," Elliot replied. "I'm just mentioning problems. They're the ones helping." She folded her arms. "And what happens when they mention a problem and expect you to help?" He didn't answer right away. In the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. "I can't back out now," he said. "If I start questioning every good outcome, I'll never move forward with anything." Priya's voice softened. "I'm not asking you to panic. I'm asking you to stay conscious. There's a difference between strategic partnership and dependency." That night, Elliot walked home instead of calling a car. It was late, but the city never looked empty, only different. Delivery riders cut through traffic, late-shift workers hurried to subways, couples argued in low voices near corners. He passed a small deli with an old photo taped to the window. Black and white men in suits smiling on a sidewalk decades earlier. For a second, he imagined DeLuca among them, younger, less polished, but with the same eyes. At his apartment building, the doorman greeted him, unusually formal. "Mr. Reed, there's an envelope for you. No return address." Upstairs, Elliot placed the thick, cream-colored envelope on his kitchen counter. The apartment around him was minimalist, almost sterile. Grey sofa, glass table, a few abstract paintings. It lacked the warmth of a home, but suited the man he had been building himself to become. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single photograph, glossy, recently printed. It showed him walking out of the Italian restaurant after that first dinner with DeLuca, looking over his shoulder. In the background, blurred but recognizable, was the black SUV. Written on the back in neat handwriting were 3 words: "Eyes open, always." No signature, no contact, just that. His chest tightened. Was this a warning, a threat, a favor? He couldn't tell. But for the first time since the signing, he felt genuinely afraid. The next day, he brought the photo to Priya. "This showed up at my door," he said. "No name, nothing." She examined it, turning it over. "This looks more like a message from someone who doesn't want you walking into this blind," she said slowly. "If it were from them, it would be more direct." "So, who else would care enough to warn me?" She hesitated. "Someone who's seen this story before." They exchanged a look. The city outside kept moving, indifferent. As the months progressed, the 800 million began to materialize into real assets: a chain of warehouses on the outskirts, a logistics hub near the port, a stake in a hotel project in Queens. On paper, it was a diversified portfolio. On the ground, it was something else: control over how goods, people, and money moved through the city. During site visits, Elliot met foremen who treated DeLuca's name with a mixture of reverence and fear. No one ever said anything explicit. They didn't need to. The way they straightened their posture when his name came up was enough. At one warehouse, a veteran supervisor pulled Elliot aside while they walked along a line of pallets. "You're the new partner?" the man asked. "That's what they tell me." The supervisor nodded. "Just remember something, Mr. Reed. In this town, ownership is just ink. Everybody knows who really runs a place by who gets called when there's a problem in the middle of the night. And who gets called here? Elliot asked. The man gave him a look that said the answer should be obvious. It's not me, and it's not you. Driving back into Manhattan, Elliot watched the skyline grow, steel and glass pushing toward the clouds. Somewhere inside those towers, people believed they were in control, guided by charts, reports, and quarterly results. He had once believed that too. Now he knew there were forces that didn't show up in any spreadsheet. The wine, he realized, had never been about celebration. It had been a mark. A signal to everyone in that room and to him that he now belonged to something that existed before the contract and would likely outlast it. And family, in this version of New York, was not something you simply walked away from. Pressure arrived, as it always does, dressed as opportunity. One afternoon, Elliot received a calendar invite marked only "Discussion Strategic Adjustment." The location was not the office, but a private club downtown, a place he had heard about but never entered. No logos, no website, just a name whispered in certain circles. Inside, the club was all dark wood, leather chairs, and low conversation. Portraits of long-dead men stared down from the walls, as if still deciding who belonged. A staff member guided him to a small room at the back, where DeLuca waited with two other men. "Elliot," DeLuca said, standing to shake his hand. "Sit. We have something to talk about. Nothing serious, just adjustments." Elliot sat, every sense on alert. "One of the warehouses," DeLuca began, "has a tenant we're not entirely happy with. They move product that attracts attention we don't need. We're going to phase them out. In their place, we have another client ready. They move goods quietly, consistently, pay on time. Good for everyone." "That sounds like a standard commercial decision," Elliot said. "Where do I come in?" DeLuca slid a folder across the table. Inside were draft contracts, all above board at first glance. The new client was a logistics company based overseas, with subsidiaries that touched several ports along the East Coast. "We'd like you to sign off on this," DeLuca said. "Your signature makes it clean. Your reputation tells people this is just business." Elliot scanned the documents, noting clauses that were vague, routes that seemed oddly chosen. Nothing illegal on paper, but plenty of room for things to happen off the manifest. "What exactly are they moving?" he asked. "Consumer goods, electronics, clothing, the usual," one of the other men said. "We're diversifying." Elliot met DeLuca's eyes. "And unofficially." There was a brief silence. The other men shifted, but DeLuca did not. "Unofficially," DeLuca said. "You don't want to know more than you need to. That's how you stay safe. That's how this stays clean for you." The room seemed to shrink, the carefully controlled air, the thick carpets, the clink of glass in the distance, all of it pressed in. This was the moment Priya had warned him about, when help turned into expectation. "If I'm signing," Elliot said slowly, "I'm responsible. If something goes wrong, my name is on the paper." DeLuca nodded. "That's why we chose you. You're credible, respected. And if I say no?" For the first time, DeLuca's smile faded completely. The air cooled. "We had a ceremony, Elliot," he said. "We welcomed you into our family. We poured wine on you like we do with people we expect to stand with us, not against us. Saying no now, it creates confusion. Confusion leads to questions. Questions lead to problems. For you, for us, for everyone." There was no overt threat in his tone. It was almost gentle. That made it worse. Elliot thought of the photo in his kitchen drawer, of the supervisor at the warehouse, of the sudden ease with which doors had opened for him in recent weeks. He also thought of his own line he had drawn early in his career. "No shortcuts that compromise who you are. I'm not here to be a front," he said quietly. "If something about this tenant can't stand the light, it shouldn't stand under my name." The other men stiffened. DeLuca held up a hand, keeping them seated. "You're a principled man," DeLuca said. "I respect that, but you're thinking too small. No one here is asking you to do anything reckless. We're asking you to trust the people who've been moving things in this city since before you had a desk." "Trust is earned," Elliot replied, "not poured out of a bottle." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed DeLuca's face. "You know why wine?" he asked. "Because it stains. Even after you clean it, something remains. A small mark, a reminder that you were part of that moment. That's what you are now, Elliot. Marked. You can't pretend you were never in that room." The words hit harder than any threat could have. He realized DeLuca was right. Walking away would not erase anything. The clip was online, the deal was public, the associations already woven into his story. "So here's what we do," DeLuca continued, softening his tone. "You take a few days. Look over the documents. Ask your smart friend at the office what she thinks, if you trust her. Then we meet again, and you tell me you understand we're on the same side." Elliot left the club with the folder under his arm, the city outside brighter than it felt. He wanted to believe there was a middle path, a way to remain in control without burning every bridge. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Control was exactly what he was in danger of losing. That night, in his apartment, he placed the folder on the table directly beside the photograph. One represented his future, glittering and dangerous. The other represented a warning, quiet and unresolved. Choosing between them would define more than his career. It would define who he became in a city that never stopped asking what you were willing to trade for success. Elliot returned to the office the next morning with a knot in his stomach and the folder in his bag. The sky was overcast, the city colored in shades of gray that matched his thoughts. Priya was already at her desk, laptop open, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her. "I need you to see something," he said. In a quiet conference room, he laid out the documents, walking her through the structure, the roots, the timing. He didn't mention the tone in DeLuca's voice or the meaning behind the wine, but the pressure was obvious between the lines. Priya listened, flipping pages, occasionally marking sections with her finger. "This is clever," she said finally. "Everything is technically clean, but the gaps are big enough to drive a truck through, literally." "And if I sign?" he asked. "You give them legitimacy. You give them cover. If law enforcement ever looks, they see your name and think legitimate logistics play. If something goes wrong, you're either complicit or naive. Neither is a good look." He leaned back, feeling the weight of every sleepless night pile up. "What would you do?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I didn't grow up chasing $800 million deals. I grew up watching my father lose his small business because he refused to work with people who offered help that felt like this. We struggled, but he slept at night. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you which choice will let you look at yourself in 10 years. The room hummed softly with the sound of the building's ventilation, distant traffic, the muffled lives of other people making other choices. "Whatever you decide," she added, "decide it as the person you want to be remembered as, not as the person they're trying to turn you into." He closed the folder slowly. The decision, he realized, was less about risk and more about identity. If he said yes, he became someone who rationalized, who looked away when it was convenient. If he said no, he stepped into conflict with people who didn't forgive easily. That evening, Elliot asked for a meeting, not at the club, not at the restaurant, but at his office, in a conference room with glass walls and a clear view of the city. It was a small assertion of his own ground. DeLuca arrived with one associate, the same man from the SUV. They looked strangely out of place among the open-plan desks and polished chrome, like characters from another story who had wandered onto the wrong set. You chose the view, DeLuca said, glancing at the skyline. I work better when I see what's at stake, Elliot replied. They sat. The folder lay on the table between them. I've reviewed everything, Elliot began. I understand the opportunity. I also understand the risk. And, DeLuca asked, and I can't sign it. Not like this. Not with this structure, these roots, and this lack of clarity about the cargo. If I'm partnering with you, it has to be on terms that keep both of us standing when the lights are on, not just when they're off. The associate's jaw tightened. DeLuca's face remained unreadable. You're saying no, he said. I'm saying not like this, Elliot corrected. If you want a partner who brings legitimacy, then we do things in a way that can survive scrutiny. Otherwise, you don't need me. You just need a name on a line, and I won't be that. A long silence followed. Outside the glass, employees moved between desks, unaware that a different kind of negotiation was taking place feet away. You know, DeLuca said at last, most men in your position would have signed and told themselves a story later about why it was okay. Maybe that's the problem, Elliot replied quietly. DeLuca studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the associate, who gave a barely perceptible shrug. Here's the thing about family, DeLuca said. It tests you. It pushes. It sees what you're made of. Sometimes it doesn't like the answer. Sometimes it does. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. I didn't pick you because you were easy, he continued. I picked you because you know what you're worth. That's useful. But understand this, walking this line with me will never be simple. There will be more adjustments, more moments like this. If every time I ask, you push back, eventually we stop asking. And when we stop asking, we stop protecting. The word hung in the air. I understand, Elliot said. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to respect that if my name is on something, it has to mean something more than survival. DeLuca gave him a look that was almost impossibly proud. Then we'll find another way, he said. For now. He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. Keep this, he added. Let it remind you that every big deal comes with a moment like this. Most people pretend they never had one. You won't have that excuse. They left without shaking hands this time. The door closed softly behind them. The office returned to its normal rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing. Elliot stood at the window for a long time afterward, watching the city live its 1,000 parallel stories. Somewhere down there, trucks moved through warehouses he now partially owned. Contracts with his name on them routed goods from one coast to another. In back rooms he would never see, his choices were being discussed, evaluated, judged. He felt no rush of victory, no clean sense of relief. There was only a heavy, complicated clarity. The wine had marked him, that could not be undone. His association with DeLuca would always be a part of his story. But so would this moment, this refusal. Later that night in his apartment, he opened the drawer and took out the photograph again. He set it beside his laptop, where a new document glowed on the screen. Notes for a restructuring proposal that would gradually reduce the partnership's leverage over his projects without lighting obvious alarms. If he had learned anything from this, it was that leaving was rarely a single dramatic exit. It was a series of quiet decisions, each one shifting the balance a little. He couldn't erase the past, but he could choose the direction of his next steps. Outside, the city pulsed with its own heartbeat. Deals were made, lines were crossed, glasses were raised. Somewhere, someone else was standing where he had stood months ago, pen in hand, unaware of the true cost of the signature. Elliot picked up his pen again, this time not to sign, but to design a way forward that didn't require him to trade away the last pieces of himself. The path would be narrow, the risks real, the pressure constant. But he would walk it with his eyes open. and if the city wanted to watch, he would let it.